G'day from Australia. My name is Ashley Davis. Welcome to my coding live stream. These sessions are recorded live, but I put them on YouTube so you can watch them later. We are building the Photosphere application, and I'm explaining my coding as I'm doing it. Please feel free to reach out to me on Twitter. You can see my handle on the screen. Before we get into coding, I start with the tradition that we have here in Australia. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land from which I'm broadcasting. I'd also like to pay my respects to elders past and present. Okay, so I'm doing these live streams to support my book, Rapid Fullstack Development. You can find it online at rapidfullstackdevelopment.com, and you can read the first chapter for free there. To catch up on previous live streams, please see my YouTube channel. That's Code Capers on YouTube. If you go to playlists, find the Rapid Fullstack Development playlist, click View Playlist, and you will see all the previous live streams that have been recorded leading up to today's live stream. All the code that I'm developing is being made available on GitHub, so search for Rapid Fullstack Development on GitHub. You can see there's a bunch of repos here that I've been working on. In the last few sessions, we worked on test-driven development, and that was the Photo Gallery TDD live stream. That is the repo we're going to be starting with today, except I'm going to make a copy of it and start a new project, just so that I preserve the code, for people who are watching this later on YouTube. Today, I'm really starting to build a proper production code for the Photosphere Frontend. It's going to be a little bit like Google Photos that you see here. And we've spent a bit of time already prototyping and doing test-driven development to create something that looks similar to this. And we're going to move forward and actually connect it to the backend today. So that's the exciting thing is many sessions ago now, I created a backend for Photosphere. And today is the day that we're going to connect the front end to the backend, be able to kind of view the photos that are uploaded to our database. So just in my terminal here, you can see all the repos that I've been working on lately. This is the one that I worked on last session, the TDD code repo. So I want to start with this repo that I was working on in the last session. Photosphere Frontend live stream. That's all good. So just making a copy as a starting point for my front end. Or I can VS Code from there. Do my npm install to get all my dependencies fresh. Now at the moment, I'm going to be working with two separate code repos. So I'm working with this new repo that I've just created, or that I'm about to create. So that'll be the front end. And I'm also going to be working with another repo, which is the back end code that I created in a live stream session, quite a while ago now. In the future, I'm probably going to combine these together into a mono repo. That's going to be a very convenient structure for this kind of application. At the moment, I'm just working with two separate repositories, just so I can keep them separate for the live stream. Before I get into any coding, I'm just going to make sure that my tests that I was creating in the last few sessions still work. So I'm looking for a bunch of passing tests here. So these are the tests for the photo gallery layout algorithm. That's the thing that basically allocates the photos in the gallery on a row-by-row basis and then expands them to fill any gaps that might appear on the right-hand side of the photo gallery. It's looking good. Okay, I'm going to keep the tests running in that terminal. I'll move over to this other terminal here, and this is where I'll run the actual web page. So we'll just see what it looks like to start with, and just make sure visually that it still looks okay. Oh, I'm in the wrong directory there. Let's find the right directory, run my dev server. Okay, let's have a look at this web page. So this is the Photosphere front end, or just the gallery with the test gallery data as we left it in the last session. So this is the starting point. At this point, I'm just going to start a new terminal here because I want to have somewhere where I can commit my code as well. And this was a Git repo, so I just copied an entire Git repo. So I want to reset this and create a new Git repo here. So I'm going to remove the .git directory. So there is no Git repo here now. I've just essentially deleted that. I'm going to do a git init to create a new repo. I'll just do a git status and just check that what's going in is good. I'm just going to check the source directory there. Yep, that all looks good. I just want to make sure that no node modules or kind of anything else like that is going to accidentally be committed to Git here. So just making sure of that. I'll add everything and I'll commit. Oh, good. This will be up on GitHub later today as well. So not there yet. If you're watching this later on YouTube, the code should be there already. Now, at the end of yesterday's session, there was a few loose ends in the gallery component. I'm going to deal with some of those now, and I'll probably deal with some of those later as well, because the main event here really is connecting the front end to the back end. So that's I'm itching to get to that before I run out of time today. I'll just make a couple of changes to the gallery component here, and I'll put this is probably not going to affect any of the tests. It could break tests, actually. This could easily break tests. So what am I talking about? Let's run the tests in watch mode, in live reload mode, so we can be writing code and looking at the tests as it's going. A couple of things here. There's a couple of hard-coded values in my gallery component that I want to move to props. With a functional React component, we can just destructure them here in the parameters to this function. So I'll move my gallery width up to there. Ultimately, in the future, gallery width will actually come from the actual kind of measured size of the HTML element. I don't know if I'm going to get time to do that in today's session. Probably not. We'll see how we go at the end. And also this target row height, which eventually I want to kind of have to be an element in the UI, like a slider or something, where the user can change the size of the row height. So I'm moving those both out to props. That's one thing. This is going to be broken now. Or passing, that's all right. So I've got to pass those props in here for this to work now. And I'll just show you. So this should be broken visually. It's not arranging the gallery in rows anymore. So that's the thing that I've just broken by not passing those props in. So I'm just passing these up a level so that the gallery can be configured from the next level up. And I'll keep these values to be what they were before. So I think I'd hard-coded that to 600. And the target row height there, I think I'd set that to 200 pixels. So this is just a stepping stone, and that gets me back to where I was. It's a nice little refactor. There's one other thing I'll change. See, because I'm doing all the props, I'll do it all in one commit. At the top of the gallery here, we're passing in the test data. So you can see here that I'm loading a JSON file for the gallery test data. I'm doing a bit of a transformation on it there. This is just test data. So this is nothing to do with the photos that are going to be stored in the backend. It's just useful to kind of have the test data here, develop the front end without even needing a backend in the early days. And there's some test data here as well that's commented out, which I can kind of uncomment if I want to kind of use that. Now, I don't want to have this in the gallery component, obviously. So I want to basically move all this up to the app component, and I want to pass it in. So this array here, this array of items. Now, obviously, if I say this, it's going to all be broken. Yep, gallery is not defined. I want to pass this in as an items prop. So I'm just setting items to be that gallery array, and this is the most important prop, so I'll make it be first. And anywhere where there's a gallery, which should only be passing into this kind of create layout function here, because it passes in the array of items and it comes back with the rows, an array of rows to display. And that's all working, that's good. Let me just check my tests. So the visual layout looks good, the tests are still passing. This is a time to commit because I've done a nice little refactor here. So I'll just do a quick review of that. Make sure that I know what I'm doing, I know what I'm committing. So that's where we added This is the app component. This is where we've added the gallery. We've added the props, so that looks good. Then in the gallery file, we've removed all the test data, and we've added these props, and we're using the props instead of the hard-coded values. So just making sure, just doing a bit of self-review there to make sure I'm not accidentally committing any bugs. I'll get this in. So one thing we can do here, now that we've made this settable as a prop, I'm going to do a little bit more visual testing, so I can actually play around with these values now, which is kind of interesting. Like, this is a good way to spot bugs. So I'm going to go really extreme and set that to 1. So I've got a gallery width of 1. What is this going to do? You know, this shouldn't be allowed, really. Like, we should probably have some constraints that the user shouldn't be allowed to do this. But I'm just interested to see what it does. It completely messes it up, of course. But where's the point where it actually works? I mean, that looks reasonable. Gallery width of 10. Also, it's not touching the last row. That was by design, that we don't kind of do any kind of resizing on that last row. Not sure if that's a great idea or not, you know, given that we changed the size. That's something we can deal with later. Let's make the gallery width 100. Yep, so we can see as we're kind of moving up here towards our kind of test size, which was 600, it's all scaling pretty well. And what happens if we use a really big size, like double the test size? It goes off screen now. Probably not what we want. We want to kind of max this out at the width of the screen. That's where it's going to be eventually. It's dealing with it reasonably well. This is probably going to kill my computer. Let's see a really big number. So we've just made the gallery number here, or the gallery width, be big enough. The browser handles it amazingly. Anyway, let's put that back to a more reasonable value that we can test with. I can also have a bit of a play with this target row height and make it small or make it much bigger. Seems to be dealing with that okay. Just trying a bunch of different sizes here just to make sure that there's no kind of visual glitches. You can see it's overlapping a little bit at the edge here, but ultimately you're not going to see that because ultimately this is going to stretch all the way to the edge of the window here. And so you won't even see that overlap there when we're done. So I'm pretty happy with that. It's time to connect the front end to the back end. This is pretty exciting. I'm going to start a new terminal window here. And I will find the code repo for the monolithic backend that we worked on ages ago. That is this one, I hope. So let's change directory into that. I think all the dependencies should be there, but let's just make sure I do an npm install to get the dependencies up to date. I'm just going to do a little bit of a test run now of the backend and make sure it works okay where we left it. Now, in my test data folder here, I've got an image, a test image to upload, and some VS Code REST client scripts that will allow us to exercise the backend without needing a front end. What I'm going to do is I'm going to copy some extra images in here that I prepared earlier, just so that we've got some interesting stuff to upload. Back1 directory, test assets to, let's put it under that test directory. I'll open VS Code for my backend. How do we start a backend application? In production, it's normally npm start. For development, I have my own convention called npm run start dev. So this should run the backend in development mode. If you want to know whatever the scripts are, go into the package.json file and it will tell you, there's a start script, here, start dev. Yeah, so you can see here that start dev concurrently runs start database. So it's starting an instant MongoDB database, and then it's actually running the backend, this other script here, start with devdb, to run the backend and connect it to the database. So we've got a database already running using my package actually called instamongo. So that basically, if you don't have it, it downloads, installs, and runs an instant MongoDB database while you're running your backend. If I hit Control C here to get out of this backend, or to get out of this in the terminal, then it's gonna shut down that database. We won't have that database anymore. So it's just a database that's there for testing, while you're running the app locally. Let's have a look at our VS Code REST client scripts. I covered this ages ago, but this plug into Visual Studio VS REST client allows you to create these scripts for exercising your backend. And so here's a little script here for kind of uploading an asset to the backend. And you can see here it's set to the placeholder. Let's just test that. Let's just run that to make sure that works out of the box and that there's no issues kind of waiting in the backend to bite us. Before I do that, I'll do the retrieve all assets as well. So we've got a HTTP GET request here that gets all the assets. I might just have to maximize this window here so we can see what it does. So running this by clicking send request here, we can see that there's no assets. If I click send request here to upload the placeholder, it gives me back the ID, the asset ID that was assigned to that placeholder asset. And now when I do retrieve all assets, it tells me the details of that asset and it stores the width and the height. Where are my test assets? Is this file format even going to work? It may not. VS Code doesn't like it. Let's just try this and see if it works. These are the files that I downloaded from Unsplash. If I go back to my other VS Code, I'm just going to look up the width and the height, which I've got in my front-end repo here. I've got the gallery test data. The files that I downloaded correspond to the first three files here. So I can look at the width and the height here, and that should be what I want. Copy that, bring that over. So this may not be a very good idea, actually kind of setting the width and the height through headers. Later on, we're probably going to want to change the backend so that the backend can actually read the image and determine these values possibly for itself. I'm not yet sure what the best way to approach that is. Oh no, I got the name of it wrong. It doesn't really matter. It doesn't really matter because this is only kind of for metadata information. There you go. So you can see that one that I just uploaded, how I've got the width and the height. It's got a URL link there basically for the source, for the image and for the thumbnail. It's recorded the original file name. All this is going to come from the front end. So that's what we're working towards at the moment, is being able to upload these things from the front end. But at the moment, what I want to do is I just want to use this test script to upload a few assets, and then I want to connect the front end so that we can view these assets in the gallery. Okay, I'm going to do this. I've tested this works now. I'm happy with that. What I'm going to do is I'm going to restart this. So this effectively kills my database. So I just hit Control C to exit it, and it killed my development database. And now I'm going to restart the backend, and I should have an empty, fresh database now. And I'll add some real images to it. And then we're going to connect the gallery, the front-end gallery, to this backend so we can actually see the assets that have been uploaded. So I'm just going to test this. Let's see that we've got no assets. So we should have no assets because we just nuked our database. I'll upload this first one. I'm going to upload the second one. So I'm just going to check out what the width and the height of that one is. Just looking back in my test data here and copying out the width and the height. So I'm just sort of emulating here what the front end is going to do when the front end is capable, which will probably be in the next session when we actually get to uploading these assets from the front end. That's that one. I'm going to upload a third one just so that we've got three assets to look at in our gallery. Get the right width and the height for this one as well. Pairing some test data here. That's really what I'm doing. Get the width and the height right for that third asset. Upload that asset. So this is doing a HTTP post request, by the way, to upload this asset. And using this syntax here to say, the body of this request is the image, or is that asset, is that photo. So now what I'm going to do is using Axios, I'm going to make a HTTP GET request to the backend to get this list of assets, and I'm going to display those assets in the front end. So the first thing I need to do is I need to install Axios, because that's what I'm going to be using to issue these HTTP requests to the backend. So I'm going to npm install Axios. Axios is, a fairly standard thing to use. Axios, kind of just using Axios makes it work in all browsers, basically. So I've installed Axios. So what I'm going to do here in the app component is I'm going to get rid of the gallery data. I'll just comment that out because I might want to bring that back later for testing. I'll import Axios. At this point, I'm going to convert this to being a class component rather than a functional component, but just because I find it easier to work with class components than to work with React hooks. So we'll call this a class that extends a React component, and then it needs a render function. So what it was doing there goes into the render function. So that's a small refactor to convert to a class. I'm just going to test that works. Oh, I better uncomment my test data here just so I can get that, just so I can see that working, that refactor. So whenever I make a refactor, no matter how small, I want to test that it works. Cool, that's looking good. I'm going to open the dev terminal, the dev tools here as well, just so I can keep an eye on the console because I want to see if there's any errors coming up, if I've caused any problems that be an error. So I'm going to get rid of that test gallery again. Obviously that's going to break front end. But what I want to do here is instead of getting this gallery from the test data, I want to get it from the back end. So we're going to need to have a constructor. And the reason we're going to need to have a constructor here, the reason we need to have a constructor is so that we can initialize a state object. Because when we download our items from the back end, we're going to store them in state. And then I'm going to use the component div mount callback function. I'll make that asynchronous because I want to do an asynchronous HTTP GET request to the backend here. This is where I'm going to use Axios. So I will use Axios. I'll await the response from Axios. So it's a GET to, let's just hard code this and then we'll refactor it. So we're working with localhost here. Ultimately, we'll plug this in as an environment variable, say. So that's doing the GET request to, what was it? Just assets, I think. And I can double check that by looking at my test script if I wanted to. I'm pretty sure that's good. And I'll just console log that. To start with, I'll just console log that. And just to see that the data is coming out, there's no point trying to, render data on the screen unless it looks correct. At the moment, I'll just get rid of the error, I'll connect the array. Okay, so here you can see we've got our assets. We've printed out the array of 3 assets that we've added to our backend. So they're the ones that we just uploaded to our backend using the test script. And you can see the data that's coming back here, the data that we have to work with, that we have to kind of get working now in our gallery, the width and the height. Now I'm going to store this in my state using the set state function. And I'll say the items in the state equal to response dot data dot assets. Does that make sense? And now what I can do is I can wire that items in the state into my items in the gallery. Now by the time we get here, this will already have been rendered, but the setting of the state causes a re-render. So once the items have arrived, it will render them here. You can see that it's actually rendering 3 images here, but there is an issue. Let's fix that now. I want to refactor this. I want to factor this base URL out. Actually, I think I need that. I think I need that for the next step. So I'm just going to factor that out now. So I'll take this whole thing out and I'll change this to include a variable called base URL. And I'm going to define that at the top of my file name. Make sure I get it right. And ideally I would share this from I'll show you how I'm going to share this later. I'm actually going to plug this in later as an environment variable, which you might think doesn't make sense in a front-end application like this, but I'll show you how to do that with Parcel. We're running out of time in this session, so I'm trying to get to this next step without having to refactor too much here. So I'm just going to copy that over for the moment, and later on we'll include that. We'll make that we'll parameterize that so that we can set that for the dev version of the web page, and we can set it differently for the production version of the web page. But that'll be something that's coming later because I need to plug that in down here, right? So each thumb here, and you'll see it in the console log that I did before, each thumb here doesn't include that kind of base URL so that you can kind of plug that in at this level. So I need to plug that in here. Let the front end basically decide, what is the back end that this is going to talk to. And hopefully that'll get us some images displaying from the back end. Quite. Oh, there's an extra slash there. I think the slash is coming through in the data. Just let me double check that. Again, always use, if you need to know what's in there, what's in your data, what's happening in your program, use console.log. It's not something you want to leave in your front end, obviously. You don't want to leave that logging in there for potential users to see. But very useful in debugging, just to be able to kind of walk through this data here and kind of look at it, kind of see what's what here. So you can see here that there is it starts with a forward slash there. So when I'm referencing the image here, I don't want that forward slash there. But I'm still not getting any images actually coming through. At this point, I'm just going to double check that this isn't a problem with my backend. So it could easily be a problem with the backend code. So given a particular ID here, I've got a script here to retrieve a particular asset. So I'm just going to plug in that ID. Oh, I bet it's this, whatever this funny format is here. That's really stuffed me up here, hasn't it? Whatever that is, it's not. There's something in my system that's just not understanding that. Oh, this doesn't help. It's hard-coded to image PNG. Oh, I know what it is. It's basically just an error in the way I've set this up. There it is. I hard-coded the image to PNG in my kind of upload script there. All right. What I'm going to do here is I might just go back to the placeholder asset. Let's see if we can get the placeholder asset in at least. That'll be some kind of win. It's not a great test, but at least we'll be connected. We'll have our front end connected to the back end. And for the next session, I'll prepare some better image assets for us to look at. Okay, I'm just going to do what I did before. Link the back end. Check that I've got no assets now. So just checking that we've got no assets. Yep, looks good. Let's upload 3 copies of this placeholder asset. So not the most interesting test, I'm afraid, but let's look at the assets. So we've got 3 copies of the placeholder asset. I'm just going to check that I can see. I just need to verify that I can see. So that looks good. That's what it's meant to look like, the placeholder asset at least. Let's see if we can see that same thing 3 times in the front end. Cool. So that didn't go completely as planned because of those assets that I downloaded. I will correct that for the next live stream so we can actually upload some nicer looking assets. Let's just recap what we've done here. So this is where we've installed Axios in our package.json. I'm not really interested in the package lock file. So this is where I've converted over to using the gallery data that's loaded backend, converted my app to a React component, a class component. So we're using the constructor here to initialize our state to an empty object. We've got a lifecycle callback here, component did mount. So this is called after the first render, and it's asynchronous so that we can do this HTTP GET request here to our backend using Axios. We factored out base URL as a variable, and I repeated that variable in 2 files. That's not the best way to do this, but that's something I'm going to refactor in the next session, and I'm going to show you how we can pass that in as an environment variable, and that will allow us to configure it separately depending on whether we're doing development or whether we're deploying this website production. Once we get back the items from the response, the Axios response, we're setting them in our state. I don't want to commit a console log, so this is not something I want to commit. So this is what git diff and this self-review is designed to kind of detect, is things that you shouldn't be committing and errors and issues. So I'm going to jump back to my code quickly and correct that. That was app.js. So I'm just going to remove this console log here. That was just for debugging. Always good to have that option for debugging. Doesn't need to be committed, unless you really want it, unless there's some really good reason to preserve that. Good idea to get rid of those. Let's get back to our git diff. So this is where we're loading our items from our state now. So our gallery items that have been loaded through from the back end. In our gallery component, the main thing we did was we had this base URL now, which we're plugging into the URL for each photo that we're going to show in our gallery, so that we can route it to a development backend or a production backend, depending on how we deploy the web page later. After I've converted that to an environment variable, which I'm going to do later. So I think we're all good there. Let's commit that. So we're now loading the gallery from the back end. And I think that's a wrap for today. So there's much more to be done here. What we're going to be moving on to next is a little bit of refactoring. We're going to make sure we've got some good test data to upload, some photos that actually work next time. And we're also going to be working on our upload page. So we're going to be able to upload photos to the back end. At that point, we'll be able to use the front end for all our testing. So uploading it and viewing the photos in the gallery. So thank you for watching. Please check out rapidfullstackdevelopment.com. These are all done to support my book. And I'll see you again next week.